So I'm going to give a very short talk. For those of you who've seen the book, it's a compilation of essays. It's not a book. It's a compilation of essays starting, I think the first one in there is from 1999 that was on the eve of the second Third World Strike at Berkeley. I don't know if you know, there was a second one when the whole thing was getting sunk by the university. On the 30th anniversary of the original strike, the second one happened, which was magnificent and won a whole lot for them there. That's the first essay. It is about the history of ethnic studies. And then most of the book covers politics in the last 20 years, race, politics especially. You know, my thing is race. That's who I am. That's what I do. That's what I think about. That's what I dream about. That's what I have nightmares about. So that's my main lens, race and class especially. And there's a theory section. And most of the stuff I've written about theory I wrote a long time ago, and is not in the book. And so I did put up a website that's bobwingracialjustice.org that has various and sundry other stuff that is not in the book for those who want to look at it. So aside from what Melody said, I think I'd like to say that I am now a new grandfather of a 5-month-old. And I am also a new father. I adopted a child who started out life as my goddaughter. And I guess I like parenting. Thought it would be a good way to spend my older years. She's going to turn 13 when I turn 70. Yikes! Okay. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to talk very briefly, very vaguely. And then you can ask anything you want from issues of theory, which I haven't talked about in a long time, but I like talking about. Socialism, the history of socialism, where we're at with that. I'm not going to touch on either of those in my opening remarks. You can ask anything you want. And if I don't know anything, I won't say anything. And if I do, I'll try to say something. So you can be thinking about what you want to talk about. You can have power over what we're going to talk about. I'm only going to talk like 15 minutes. We'll see if that's true. But we'll try it. Might be shorter. So I think just on the front end, to talk about what is really a very consequential moment in the history of the country, and really a consequential moment in the history of the world. It may be that 100 years from now, this period will be looked back upon as one of those turning points in history, like the 30s, like the 60s, like some earlier periods, like the Civil War. In fact, from my point of view, probably this is the closest we've come to a situation like the Civil War since the Civil War. We are, in my opinion, in a state of peaceful, so far, relatively peaceful Civil War. We're at a period of polarization that is really quite amazing. Maybe the polarization was similar for a short time in the 60s. I'm not sure. I can't remember, even though I was there. But we're talking about a situation now where about half the country doesn't understand the other half of the country and pretty much violently disagrees. The situation has been building. I mean, the far right really had the initiative in the process. Thank God we've taken up our side of it in the last 6 or 7 years. But for a long time, it was a one-sided polarization from the right, starting the modern far right started pretty much in the immediate aftermath of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act when they were in the soup. The racists were deep in the soup. They were suffering what potentially could have been their end. That's what it was like in that period. The party that they had occupied for so many years, it was the Democratic Party, was the party of slave owners, the party of white supremacy, initiated the Civil Rights Act. And they were isolated sectionally also. In the white racists in the South were seen as an outlier in the rest of the country. And for many years, they had been running third parties for president, not in the, they ran the Democratic Party in the South, and they also occupied many of the key congressional committee chairs because they were there, most of their people were there forever. And so they had a huge impact even on the New Deal, as you probably know. I'm not going to go off too many tangents. But basically, the modern far right started really back then, and they hit upon the strategy that they've been carrying out since then, way back then. They got rid of the third party stuff. They pretty much got rid of the Ku Klux Klan and the most overt kind of forms of racism. And they set about concocting a long-term strategy. They set about concocting and building strategic unity, not just tactical unity, not only among the leaders of the far right-wing base, but also among a series of billionaires in almost every state. This is something that's not particularly well known. In North Carolina, where I was, there's one billionaire there. The hell's his name? Somebody help me here. I'm old. Can't remember his name. He funds 80% of the far right wing, and he is a serious organizer. He's not just a billionaire. And they have people like this in almost every state. They spent decades building unity at a high level. People have read Democracy in Chains. That gives you a sense. They were not just messing around, putting a few pieces of paper, to unite on. They spent serious time organizing their key people and have done, let's face it, a heck of an organizing job. I mean, how many other movements can you think of that shed its leaders every 6 or 7 years and kept on moving? Had terrible defeats. I mean, the latest one being the Obama defeats, where again they were threatened with potential oblivion and bounced back. I mean, there's a level of, that doesn't happen by itself. There's some real unity among some serious people involved in the far right, and the Republicans dominated the presidency from 1968 up until Obama. There was Jimmy Carter's one term. There was Bill Clinton's 2 terms, which only happened because Ross Perot ran. It was still a very Republican period. And so, and then in 1980, they became a major partner in the Republican Party under Reagan, and then proceeded now to be the first popular movement ever to capture one of the 2 political parties in the country. But of course, their work goes way beyond politics. It's not only in policy, it's in building mass organizations and whatnot. And we pretty much got clobbered for decades. It wasn't a lot of fun coming of age in the 60s with so much optimism and then getting clobbered for a few decades. But finally, there started to be a comeback, mainly starting around 2000, I would say. We entered a period, instead of it basically being a period of Republican dominance, to a period of tremendous polarization and tit-for-tat struggle. It seemed like, how the hell George W. Bush was able to get reelected. You know what the secret to that was? Does anybody know what the actual voting secret to how he won was? Anybody remember? Well, they cheated there. The Democrats cheated in New Mexico. It wasn't, Florida was the big thing the first time, right? But the second one, you know what happened? And it hasn't quite moved back. I think it will move back this time. White women moved 10 points to the Republican Party. They moved 10 points to the Republican Party in 2004. And they had been a more or less Democratic vote. They went to a pretty much 50-50 vote, which is where they've stayed until the last midterm. Hopefully, that will change in this next election. Anyway, my point being that, where's my book? Anybody got a copy up in the front row? Okay. So, there's the map. This map on the front of the book is the map of the presidential results in 2016, county by county. Okay? Are we going to overcome this really quickly here? Okay? They control about 85% of the territory of the United States of America. Less than half the population, but about 85% of the territory. More laws are made at the state that affect people's lives are made at the state level than even the federal level. They may not be as huge, but they control I don't know what they were down. They were almost got to 2/3, right? They were trying to get to 2/3. They were like 2 states away, trying to get ready for a constitutional convention when we started finally this last election going the other direction. Anyway, my point being that this is a long-term fight. It's kind of like the Civil War. The Civil War really started in a certain way in 1820 with Missouri Compromise. It pretty much went till the defeat of Reconstruction in 1877, which, by the way, was the first time that a person who won the presidential candidate who won the popular vote lost the election. And the deal was made. Do people know what the deal was? The deal was the Democrat, representing the white supremacists, won the popular vote, but they were deadlocked in the Electoral College because there was dispute over electors, who was to be seated. So the deal was Samuel Tilden was the presidential candidate of the Democrats. Rutherford B. Hayes was the candidate of the Republicans, the candidate of the purported Reconstruction Party, the former party that had prosecuted the Civil War. And they made a deal. The Democrats said, we will give you the presidency, you remove all troops from the South. And there went Reconstruction with it, a rather consequential deal, ending Reconstruction, which in a certain way was the most progressive part of American history up to that time, which, by the way, is where I came up with third Reconstruction. That was the first one. The second one being the civil rights period. The third one, the reason why I use it is I'm trying to say we need two things. We need something rooted in American history, and we need a vision for the future that is qualitatively better than now, but not nirvana. We're not going from now to nirvana. We need a concrete program that is winnable, but qualitative, that is transformational, but short of nirvana. Otherwise, we get stuck in demanding things that no one can imagine is even remotely possible, let alone actually implementable. Okay, so I guess I'm basically trying to say, get ready for a long-term fight. I am just thrilled that our side has really taken the field in a big way since Trump's election. The political terrain of today is completely different than in 2016. Primarily a result of a surge on the left, a surge in the women's movement, a surge of anti-racist sentiment, especially among white people. Amazing I don't know about you all, I'm amazed, I'm happy about it. Of course, we're talking about huge polarization. We got one part of the population going back to wherever they think they can go back to, and we have another part of the population that has made socialism and racial justice and women's rights a serious conversation in the country. Okay, for a while we just had this side. Now we got them both, which means more polarization. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And it's not going to be quick. Okay? We have to be ready for a long-term fight. I think at least, look at that again. Wake up in the morning and look at this map. Okay? Obama, by the way, Clinton won less than 500 of 3,000 counties. Obama only won 600 and something when he won. Okay? So we have a heck of a long way to go, and this fight will probably have a lot of ups and downs, but it's important to try to be as strategic as possible, yet we need momentum. We have to win in 2020. We have to win, or we could become the losers in a long-term fight very rapidly. And even if we win, if we don't win with a continued surge from the left, let's face it, if it's mainstream Democrats who completely control the Congress at that time, the likelihood is they're just going to compromise. You know, it'll be a defeat for Trump, but not a huge defeat for Trumpism. And, you know, I can't think of anybody who you might hope that somebody might fit this category, who wanted to be president, who didn't want to have more power, and Trump has certainly given more power to the presidency. It's hard to imagine that being given up unless there are forces that make it happen, our forces. Finally, and you know, these parallels are, I really do think this is fundamentally about race. It is not only about race, it's about everything. But where is the political fire and what is the political cutting edge? In this country, it's always been race. The country was founded on slavery and settler colonialism. We fought a civil war. 500,000 people died over slavery. And in the recent history, where did the far right come from? Reaction to the civil rights movement. When did it catch fire? Did it catch fire during the recession? No, it caught fire when Obama was elected president. Why did it catch fire when Obama got elected president? Because fundamentally, the biggest, in my opinion, fear of the far right is that white people are going to become the minority and are going to lose. White supremacy is going to be gone. And to be honest, I think that's highly overstated, to say the least. California's been a majority of people of color for how many years now? 15, 20? Whites are still 75% of the vote, something like that. But still, it is a real danger because guess what? At least a certain significant percentage of white people are moving strongly to the left. And so that really, I believe, from the point of view of the two far poles in the racial conflict in America, the white supremacist pole, and in particular blacks and Native Americans, this is a level of historic fight, and somebody is going to win and somebody's going to lose. We may have numbers on our side, but we don't necessarily have power on our side. And I guess that's where I'm going to end. We really have to. There are many things that need. There's nothing that doesn't help, just about, when it comes to the struggle. But if we don't think strategically in terms of how we're going to build power, even if we have public opinion, if we don't think about power, we're still going to lose. Those Republicans are absolutely, positively ruthless. They don't give one whit about anything except what they think they have the power to do and what the opposition has the power to do. And we are not going to win without having that point of view ourselves. So I'm going to stop there, and then, like I said, I think ask whatever you want. But I think Melody gets the first question. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm first. Okay, so I just have one question. So just on the topic of how do we get power, what are some of the challenges in organizing in 1968, or just in any of the times that you have been organizing, and how do they compare to the challenges of today? Kind of a big question. So
Yeah, I mean, everything's different, everything's the same, but everything's different. 1968, the whole 60s, was a period when progressive forces were on the offensive, were on the defensive. It was a period when clearly black people were in the lead of the movement, and anti-racism was the coin of the realm for anybody who wanted to be considered progressive. Pretty much in an almost direct way, kind of similar to what happened during the abolitionist movement. Most of the other movements literally grew out of the black liberation movement, the Asian American movement, the women's movement, the gay liberation movement. And we had established, proven, fantastic black leaders who had been girded in struggle. Another thing was, of course, that movement was internationalist. I mean, what was the term for people of color, which was coined somewhere in 66, 67, didn't become known or used until the Third World Strikes at San Francisco State and Berkeley. Well, the term was third world people. And it meant we were part of Vietnam. We were part of Southern Africa. We were part of Cuba. And the movement, of course, because of the Vietnam War, I mean, that was totally in our face. Internationalism was also an absolute must. Today, it's like, oh my God, here we are trying to pull a coup off in Venezuela, and what has anybody done about it? It's terrible. It's understandable in a certain way, but whoa, it's bad. There was a level of solidarity that you may call internationalism, but it's really about solidarity with people who were oppressed of any type, anywhere, back then that was powerful. The spectrum of the left was much farther than today. The left pretty much is the DSA, okay? Back then, the DSA was the far right wing of the left. I mean, that's true. You know, the DSA back then could hardly, they could hardly oppose a war in Vietnam, let alone be, you know, and, you know, have similar problems as today. It was always kind of largely white organization too. But, of course, look how big it is today. Holy shit. I mean, it's an incredible thing. Yeah, I mean, today, back then, oh my God, okay. Elections vexed the hell out of us. We didn't want to do them. And so, in 1968 was the height of the radical movement in the United States, and probably in a worldwide sense, it was probably at its height in 1968. And what happened in 1968? Talk about consequential historical moment. Assassination of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. We had the potential, at least, of having, I mean, Robert Kennedy had become an actual progressive, a real progressive. We had the potential to have a progressive presidency and a progressive administration with an inside and an outside, with a Dr. King-led movement and others on the outside, and with those who moved to the left out of the Kennedy administration and other places inside. And the double assassination and the alienation of so much of the movement to elections, and the fact that the Vietnam War was the Democratic Party's war, and the Democratic Party refused to nominate an anti-war candidate, meant that pretty much the left sat out the 1968 election, and who got elected? At the height of the movement, Richard Nixon. Not just a Republican, a part of the right wing of the Republican Party. Huge turn of events in terms of what both were possible at the time, and we got the worst possible result, in part due to our own short-sightedness. I mean, it was difficult. It was difficult. I certainly did not support Hubert Humphrey and didn't want to have anything to do with it. But hey, look what we got in hindsight. I think in hindsight, it was a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake. And Nixon only won by 500,000 votes. It's not like it was not overcomable. Anyway, one of the things that's similar is the United States, I don't know, you know what it is, but we always seem to have a two-generation gap in the left. Not a one-generation gap, a two-generation gap. That's like, you know, grandparents and their kids, not parents and their kids even. It's devastating. We never get continuity. We never learn from the previous generations of the left. We just reinvent the wheel each time, and then it takes 20 years to get it right again. It's like, and, you know, I think that the whole idea, probably people know I've been a strong advocate of what I call an inside-outside strategy, that we have to have a movement inside and outside of electoral politics, inside and outside of the Democratic Party. And it's kind of happening now. It's pretty much the thing these days, but man, has it taken a long time, and we're not still fully on board with it. And one of the funny things that's, not funny, one of the unfortunate things that's happened as large parts of the left have finally got on board with electoral politics, whoops, suddenly the outside is disappearing on us. When's the last time we had a round of demonstrations like in 2017? Which is going to come back and bite us if we can't move that part back again. Not just the demonstrations, it's really just a level of activation. I mean, we have an enormous activation in elections. I saw that starting in 2000, by the way, when I was in the anti-war movement. That giant sucking sound in 2004 was anti-war activists going into electoral work. And it kind of seems to be happening again. It's not easy to do both. As you know, elections take enormous energy. I mean, they just take giant energy, and we're not that developed. You know, it takes a massive, highly organized left to be able to manage both. It seems like we've never gotten to that point. The closest was probably in the 30s, And, you know, elections are so expensive, so encompassing. They happen all the darn time. And I just hope we can manage it going into these next 2 years. So I would also say, you know, although the women's movement has suffered tremendous setbacks in the last 30 years, it's been something like 2,000 bills in the states and cities limiting reproductive rights just in the last 10 years have passed. It's like something horrible and ugly. But on the other hand, we have the Me Too movement and the incredible now stature of the trans movement, things that were, I mean, are amazing to me. As an I'd never expected this. I didn't expect a black president either, but I guess that my expectations are too low. Whatever. But we have a situation that in some ways, the gender issue is just such a stark way to talk about the polarization. You know, we can even people in some of the most reactionary and powerful institutions in America can be Me Too'd and lose their job from Fox News, for God's sake. You know. Meanwhile, we have a president who's a known sexual harasser. We have people running for governor all over in the Republican Party who are just straight up about it. We're, you know, child abusers, and the polarization is enormous. But isn't it just magnificent that I personally feel like I've never seen sexism challenged like this. I mean, it's being challenged root and branch, something that, you know, really male ownership over females has been mother's milk from the dawn of humanity. And to see it challenged like this is positively fantastic. So, I mean, I think at one level everything is different as everything's the same. We still have a problem of building a actual movement that is multiracial, not just in composition, but in its politics, that is really rooted in the United States, and that can find a strategy that can stick, that we can, you know, the right has basically followed the same strategy for 50 years. They've made a million tactical adjustments. And I think it's possible for us to do the same. And, you know, in the introduction to my book, I tried to summarize my point of view on that. But even if we have to change strategies, if we can get to scale and really focus on power and power analysis and how we're going to gain power, whether that power is in public opinion or on the ground, we need both. We're in for a long-term fight. I really believe it's decades long in the best case. It's not a one election thing. We can win and lose. The right has shown incredible capacity to come back, and they have that kind of fundamental resources to be able to do that. And like I said, that we also have at the same time the fight in the Democratic Party. I mean, look at California. It's just such a perfect example. Here's the richest place in the world. It's the richest place in the world. And the U.S. Census officially announced a year and a half ago that California has the highest poverty rate in the country when you consider cost of living. Not just numbers, rate. We have a higher poverty rate than Mississippi. You know, we face a lot of enemies, but we can't take them all on at once. We have to take them all on at once, but not at once, if you know what I mean. We have to fight them. At the same time, we have to be able to unite with them. We fight them and we unite with them when we need to. So I'm kind of. Do you have a follow-up? Do you have anything real specific on your question that you want me to address? Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I understand that Elizabeth Warren wants to eliminate the Electoral College. Do you think that will be accomplished before the next election?
It certainly will not be accomplished before the next election, but I believe it is accomplishable. And I think one of the things that I'm proudest to have kind of popularized is how bad really the Electoral College is. I'm going to run through it again in case some of you haven't heard it. First, where did the Electoral College come from? How many of you heard of the piece in the Constitution where slaves were said to be 3/5 of a person? Okay, aside from those of you who remember anything that I or anybody else has written about this as regards the election, I'll just say it. The 3/5 rule was basically this. Basically, slaves were no kind of a person. You could kill a slave. You could sell a slave. You could do, if you owned a slave, you could do anything you wanted without legal consequence. They were counted as 3/5 of a person for only one reason. That reason was in counting the population for the specific purpose of allocating how many congressional representatives each state would receive. Representatives in the House of Representatives, okay, not in the Senate, obviously, which was 2 each, okay? And this was not some intellectual struggle. You know, every major leader, with the possible exception of one, of the revolution was pro-slavery, if not a straight-up slaveholder. These folks were not, putting together something, on the basis of, we the people, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de. They were going to make sure slavery was in the lead. And so what this was about was the slaveholders and their allies knew that if slaves were not counted as people, well, the slave states wouldn't have hardly any representatives in the House of Representatives and would be overwhelmed in the Congress, okay? And so they could do math, and they figured out if they counted slaves as 3/5 of a person, that would give the slaveholders the power they needed in the House of Representatives. It was a beautiful deal for them. They could count them and represent the slaves. This is not like the slaves got any representation. Okay, then the Electoral College translated that into controlling the presidency. Because the way the Electoral College, which was invented whole cloth, there was no such thing in the world as far as I know. There's only 2 or 3 of them now. And they were just copying us. The Electoral College was invented based on this. However many representatives you have in Congress, senators and representatives, that's how many electors you have in the Electoral College, okay? Therefore, if you control the Congress, you control the presidency. Did that make sense? Okay, so that's where it came from. And it basically was the way that the slaveholders were able to rule the country. I mean, there wasn't a president who uttered any word against slavery until Lincoln. And Lincoln only opposed the spread of slavery, of course, which was crucial because guess what? You oppose the spread of slavery, whoops, you just lost the House of Representatives and the Senate. Political power was what that was about, okay? So they made a preemptive, in a certain way, politically preemptive strike long before anybody serious was calling for the, with the power, was calling for the end of slavery. So how's the Electoral College work today? Well, the states have the right to determine how their Electoral College is elected. They get a number of electors based on how many people they have in the Congress, Senate plus House, okay? So what happens in the South? 56% of black people live in the South. The most powerful, progressive, and democratic force in the country. 56% still live in the South. There's only a couple southern states that currently tend to vote Democratic, okay? So it's Maryland, Virginia kind of, sort of, once in a blue moon, North Carolina, once in a blue moon, Florida, right? There's others coming up. Things are changing. Hey, Stacey Abrams, Andrew Gillum, right? Things are changing, but as they stand, what it means is that the place with the majority of black people, the black people get outvoted in every state except for those couple. In Mississippi, black people are the highest percentage of any state in the country, 38% of the vote. Black people, 38% of the vote. Well, 90% of white Mississippians vote Republican. Black people get outvoted. They don't, basically approximately 50% of black people, the outcome in the Electoral College is the same as if they had absolutely no right to vote at all. All of those votes of black Southerners, basically, they don't count. They don't win them a single electoral vote. And there's a second important piece of the Electoral College, which is that take one of my home states is Wyoming. That's where my my mother's parents were from. Wyoming has about 290,000 voters. They get 3 electoral votes, 2 senators, 1 representative, which is the minimum, right? They have about 1 electoral vote for every 95,000 voters. Well, California, Florida, all the big population states, we have about 1 electoral vote for about every 250,000 voters. And all of the small population states, except for Rhode Island, are red. It gives them a huge structural advantage. Those two things together make, for the Democrats to win. This is kind of new. I mean, the race part is not new. But the rural-urban divide in voting is relatively new. The early socialist movement was heavily rural. The rural-urban divide in politics is only about 30 years old. But the way it works because of that now is it gives, between those two, the Republicans have a giant head start. Now, how can the Electoral College be defeated? There's 2 ways to do it. One way is constitutional amendment. 2/3 of the Congress and 2/3 of the states have to approve a constitutional amendment. Not going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future. But there is a second way, which is, as I said, the states get the right to determine how their electoral votes are chosen. And there are actually 2 states where it's not winner take all. There's only 2, Maine and Nebraska. Am I right? It's Maine and Nebraska, I believe. In those 2 states, what they do, they both decided basically that they vote, if you win the vote in a congressional district, you get an electoral vote. In other words, it's by congressional district, not by a statewide vote. The statewide vote determines the 2 electors that would be based on the Senate. But the other ones, so do people get that? Yeah. So if there's 3 congressional districts, whoever wins each one of them gets an electoral vote. Okay? It's only 2. So anyway, there has been a movement after the 2000 election when it was finally exposed. A lot of the Electoral College stuff was exposed. Somebody came up with a very good plan, which is to pass initiatives in the states. And 11 states, I believe, have already passed an initiative that says that the Electoral College votes from our state will go to whoever wins the national popular vote. Okay? But there's a very important second clause to that, because what would happen if California passed that? Hey, the Republicans would get 20 electoral votes they don't currently get. Doesn't help us any, and it's no more democratic. So the second clause is that this would only go into effect once a number of states that hold a majority of the Electoral College votes pass that initiative. Okay? So there are 11 have passed it. I think we can have one hell of a campaign for it in the next 2 to 4 or whatever years. It's a very short time to try to pass it in enough states by the next election. And even after it gets passed, I mean, it's going to be a hullabaloo of a fight because the Republicans know it would be their death knell. They're not giving this, they don't care about fairness. Are you kidding me? I remember I was in South Africa right after W got elected in 2000. And, he appointed Colin Powell as the first black Secretary of State. And Colin Powell made a big deal about, I'm going to be the first Secretary of State to make his first foreign trip to South Africa. It happened I was in South Africa when he was there. So there was going to be a demonstration. So I go out, I'm trying to find the demonstration. I can't find the damn demonstration. So I went inside. And Colin Powell is up there talking about how the United States has always supported Nelson Mandela, which, as you know, they were like the last one. But then he goes like this. He says, and he's pretty much, I can't quite be Colin Powell, but at least this part is Colin Powell. He says, some people criticize the United States for not giving enough support to African countries. And he says, let me tell you this. The United States will never support a country that doesn't have one person, one vote. South Africa, they just ripped him. It was a thing of beauty. But, yeah. So, I mean, really, the Electoral College, even if we don't win in the short run, I believe that one of the most important political thrusts of the movement has got to be over simultaneously exposing the structure of racist minority rule in the country and advocating for and winning more democratic structures, okay? That can include the Electoral College, the Senate, 2 each, regardless of population, gerrymandering, redistricting, the census, district elections and local elections, which is huge in places where minorities are, people of color are a growing number. I think that we have to simultaneously expose mercilessly that that the power of the Republicans rests on thoroughly undemocratic, often and very often racist rules, and we have to fight to change them. Again, so that it'd be not, winning under whatever rules, we have to win under whatever rules. It can be done, but we then need to change the damn rules.
So, changing the rules, I'm wondering, do you see the Democratic Party or any of the candidates besides Elizabeth Warren going out in lead, taking on the issue of all of those parts of the disparity of the system?
You know, I'm a terrible person to ask a question like that. I didn't see any of them ready to advocate for Medicare for all, and there they are. You know, so I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, I think if there's a real motion on the ground and from a certain number of politicians, I think it's very possible.
So it would be possible to convince the Democratic Party to take those issues on as a way of bolstering support for all of them?
I think that's more unlikely, and it would be place to place. There'll probably be some cities and some states where some candidates might. I mean, the Democratic Party is just like, to call it a network is giving it more credit than it deserves. It doesn't, when it determines its program, before the president, it's forgotten the next day. Nobody follows it. The only discipline they have is through funders and through power in elected bodies over their elected members. So I think even if we got them to pass it, I don't think it would be impossible to get them to adopt it in their program at the Democratic National Convention. I'm not saying it's definitely going to, I'm just saying it's up to, if we can create real motion around this, I think it's possible. That's what I'm trying to say. But even if it happens, I don't necessarily expect a lot from the Democratic Party. Because guess what? The honchos in the Democratic Party, they benefit from this system too. It works for them too. And the stupid thing about the honchos in the Democratic Party is if it works for them internal to the Democratic Party, they're willing to lose to the Republicans. Some of them. Okay? That may be changing because the stakes between them, it used to be kind of, sort of, okay to say twiddledee and twiddledum between the two parties. You can't say that about these two parties anymore. These two parties, it's really, what's amazing, it's since about 1995, it's really the first time in American history that pretty much all the forces to the left of center are in one party and all the forces right of center are in the other party. I mean, look how it was before. The Democratic Party in the New Deal had the most radical forces in the country, the trade union movement. Black voters came over from the Republican Party, but it had the white supremacists still in the party. Both parties have actually been split internally, which has caused them both to create a certain consensus among them because they had the issue not just between the parties, but inside their own party holding their coalitions together. That's no longer the case.
What do you think of the potential for the Poor People's Campaign as a unifier of the various alternative movements?
I moved to North Carolina to work with Reverend Barber. Reverend William Barber is the leader of the Poor People's Campaign. He was the leader of the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina. How many people have heard Reverend Barber speak? Reverend Barber, he's got some stuff, doesn't he? I mean, Reverend Barber, in my opinion, is if not the most eloquent and deepest spokesperson for a really progressive platform, who, by the way, also likes to use the third Reconstruction. I just think he is a magnificent spokesperson for a moral and progressive politics. He's magnetic and he's deep. Reverend Barber is deep. He is not just fancy words. He knows his stuff. God, am I going to tell the truth here? And then it's going to get back. Oh, well, what the hell? What have I got to lose? How do I put this? So I do think that. But I also think that he is not coming anywhere near maximizing that capability. He is not making the connections that he could make quite easily, in my opinion, with other sectors of the movement. I mean, wherever Reverend Barber goes, he lights the place up. I mean, they named him the head of the DNC, for God's sake, off one speech, you know? And he, in my opinion, could, if he wished to, get himself much more strongly positioned. And the same goes with the poor people's movement. I mean, his politics, like I said, I think is fantastic. And you know, and Reverend Barber can not only talk to deep historical things, he is also quite a very good tactical polemicist. The guy can polemicize on the front end. The guy is just smart politically as well as in his general point of view. I think he has a weakness. One of the weaknesses I would like to see him overcome that I think really is one of the obstacles to him maximizing his potential is he pretty much insists on only functioning seriously in a situation led by religious folk.
Led by what?
Religious people, religious leaders.
That's changing.
I'm not saying that's going to happen at every local level, okay? And I hope it's changing. Because I do think it's been you know, when I was thinking about moving to North Carolina, I had a friend there. You remember Al McShirley? Al McShirley was the famous leader of SNCC. He got charged with sedition for organizing West Virginia coal miners. And Al was an old friend of mine, and he was Reverend Barber's main advisor. He was actually he and his wife strategized for Reverend Barber to become head of the North Carolina NAACP and pretty much helped them all along the way. And Al convinced me to move there to try to take his place because Al was getting old and his wife was very ill. So I had a series of meetings with Reverend Barber to see whether it might work. And I asked him what he really, really wanted. And this was before the Republicans took over North Carolina, by the way. The Democrats were still in control of North Carolina. And this was 2009, 2009, okay? And he told me what he really wanted was a megachurch. And I was actually okay with that. Fine. A great, fantastic, social justice megachurch? Hey, how could that hurt us any? But it's not a good point of view if you're trying to be the leader of a big movement. And I hope it's changing. And I think it not only has to change with him, it has to change with the people around him. I mean, I get a call from Al almost every month asking, what do I think about this, that, or the other? And I just think when you put yourself in that mode from the standpoint of Reverend Barber, he has so many opportunities that he just doesn't identify, or if identified, passes up. And I hope that it changes, because I do believe that he is the strongest advocate for a powerful, moral, progressive point of view in the country. I just think the guy is tremendous. But I mean, I don't know. If you have a report on the poor people's movement, that would be great, because I'm not that up to date.
Well, I can give you an example of where it's changing. In California, the 4 co-chairs, only one is a minister. I'm one of the 4 co-chairs in California.
For what chairs?
Co-chairs.
Co-chairs.
I can tell you I'm not a religious person, nor am I a minister.
I've known you a long time. I've always known you to be religious.
So I think initially when it started out, it did have a heavy center and a heavy emphasis on making sure pastors pastors, ministers, people of faith at the center, because they're easy in terms of organizing. But I think there's been a lot of pushback, and I can't speak for other states, but I can say in California that only one of the 4 co-chairs is a minister, and the rest of us are not necessarily associated with any faith.
Yeah.
So, an atheist.
So let me just say this. I am ready anytime to help Reverend Barber. I have the highest regard for the guy. I think there are other issues that he has to have a movement. You know, he has a certain kind of movement point of view, but his movement doesn't move as quick as the movement moves, which is hard. You know, you got to be ready to, like, oh, there's an opportunity, and you have 4 days, you know, to make a move. I'll give you an example. After Charlottesville, it so happened, I don't know how this happened. Maybe it was, I think he had some long-standing ties with some key people in Charlottesville. Anyway, they put together a coalition in Charlottesville that pretty much was soup to nuts of not just progressives even in Charlottesville. And he got a bunch of people to march with them to Washington. And Al calls me up and he says, you know, what do you think the possibilities are? I said, well, look, can we do a sit? And I said, I don't think that's what's going to be possible. What I do think is really possible is, I think if you can make a list of even as small as 5 key movement leaders. You get them on board, you'll get everybody on board. You call a big press conference, and at that press conference, you call for a giant march on Washington 2 months later, or whatever you want to call for. Actually, that's when they were going to kick off the Poor People's Campaign. They could have done both at the same time. And they just can't think that way, at least so far. And in this situation, I mean, he has enormous potential. And and like I said, I'm sure there's lots of people ready to help.
I'm Corey, I'm the co-chair of the Sacramento DSA.
Woo, woo.
Thanks for coming. I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about, you talk about the inside-outside strategy, and how can we kind of use what we have now and with Poor People's Campaign and with DSA, and how do we kind of move this forward, especially considering that one of the internal debates in DSA right now is, our National Political Committee just endorsed the Bernie Sanders candidacy, which is awesome. But one of the internal debates now is, well, how are we going to engage in this campaign on a national level and at a local level? That's something that's yet to be worked out. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, let me just say first my attitude about Bernie Sanders, just for the hell of it. I mean, Bernie Sanders, in a certain way, invented the left that we have today. I mean, nobody knew it existed till he ran. He deserves incredible credit for that. But I will tell you, back when he first ran, the first time around, on one level he was a dream, on the other level he was a nightmare for me too. And I'll tell you why. I just never thought we were going to go back to the days of really a white left. And I was like, oh, geez. Now, he wasn't near as bad as the old white left, but he wasn't great. And it showed up in the vote. Not just in the vote, but wasn't even, but the key thing in a way, not only did he not particularly relate to black, he didn't really try to relate to, that's the hard thing, okay? Now, coming into this election, I have to say that I hadn't seen that he did a whole lot to work on that. And I'm like, man, can you count? Are you going to win without a significant people? I mean, whatever's in your brain, you're a politician, you're running for president. Do you intend to win? I mean, these other folks, I mean, I'm not ready to say who's sincere about what, but a lot of them can count better. And he had all this time, at least visibly, I didn't see much. So I was a little skeptical. I supported him the first time. I mean, who cares whether I support? I mean, it's not like my voice counts for anything, especially since I didn't try to broadcast it per se. But then comes his outing. And holy shit, I strongly suspect that he way outperformed his own expectations. I strongly suspect that the support he got on the front end was greater than his maximum goal. Because not only did he raise a shit ton of money on the front end, something like 39% of the emails the money came from were new. Then a poll comes out, he's running second among black people. Now, of course, he probably has the highest name recognition of any candidate. And on the, at the beginning, name recognition can be everything. But even still, it's something to build on if he wants to. I do believe that that we should support him. But he needs to make some moves. He needs to make some moves. And let us not, between him and Joe Biden, they're 160 years old. Look what happened to everybody who became president. They go in looking 40, they come out looking 90. To say this is an ass kicker of a job is like a gross understatement. And so, I think that, I think he needs support. Now, I don't know what he even wants, but I think there can be support offered in a whole lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be, I think any organization that's offering support has to assess what it has to offer and also what it has to gain. I just can't stand the thought of another whole movement based on one person. It just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It works in the short run, but then you better build it or it goes away fast. So I think with DSA, I don't know your strengths and weaknesses city to city. In some places, maybe it's better to run an issue campaign. Or some places can do both. Run issue campaigns and also the campaign. But I think you have to make a strong assessment of your strengths and weaknesses in different places, and then figure out what you can do. And you don't have to do everything he says, right? One of the things that that's my thought about it. And I think that you have to have your own goals in it. If your goal is only to help Bernie Sanders win the election, what are you going to do if he doesn't win the nomination? Or what are you going to do if he doesn't win the presidency? Bernie Sanders, and not just Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. Basically every Democratic candidate, in my opinion, has major challenges to win. If you're on the right wing of the party, you're Joe Biden. I don't think any of those other people are significant who are really on that wing of the party. Your problem is that you're not going to energize the base of the voters, and that's your problem. And Trump has got 42%. He'll probably be at least 45% if the election were today. A lot of water to pass under the bridge. Last I checked, a Mueller report just came out, something like that. Anyway, there's a lot of things that are going to happen, right? But from this point of view, if you're on the right of the party, your problem is how are you going to energize the left? And how are you going to prevent groups like the DSA, not the DSA as a group, but significant sections of the DSA from not supporting you against Trump, which, as you know, is a danger. And I think you guys better think about that. And what would be the consequences of that, and what would be the consequences for the DSA? If we go into an election, it's not Bernie Sanders, it's anybody else, and there isn't strong support, kind of get sidelined. That giant whooshing sound day by day is let's defeat Trump, you know. And anyway, that's my 2 bits worth. And I think that in general, I think that's true of all of us. We have to see in what ways we can simultaneously help Bernie and build the movement that's going to last beyond Bernie.
I heard you talking about being both on the inside and on the outside. And one of the things that really bothers me about the United States is that we are so insular. We really don't look at other countries. But during these last 2 years, our reputation worldwide is scary. I don't have to say any more about that. But wouldn't it be tremendously helpful if the Democratic Party began to look outside the United States for support as well? And you know, become more repented with these other countries.
It would be great. It's not going to happen. The Democratic Party is not that kind of institution. It's not going to look for support, and it's not, and unless there's a tremendous insurgency, it's not going to support. It's not, for example, going to defend Venezuela. I mean, like I said, even the left isn't doing that, let alone the Democratic Party. So but even in the strongest days of internationalism in the United States, the Democratic Party would never do that. And I don't believe they would now. But on the other hand, we need to do it, you know, and at a certain level, I mean, the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party. On the other hand, it's a shell. And, you know, and at one level, we're the Democratic Party, whether we identify as Democrats or not. The fact is we're the ones who make the Democratic Party go. I mean, we're stuck in a system where we have no choice except to use the ballot line of the Democratic Party until, I mean, most people in the United States don't even know that there are other systems of elections than what we have. I mean, we have a system of winner-take-all district elections. In that system, it's winner-take-all. And that's why we have basically 2 parties, and every third party is a spoiler. It's not because they want to be a spoiler, but in our system, it means they're going to take votes from the party closest to them and help the party farthest from them win. And that's not the way it is in the vast majority of democracies. They have multi-party parliamentary systems. But in ours, that's where we're stuck. And the Democratic Party, as an institution, is a thoroughly elitist institution. And regardless of who occupies the Democratic Party. So until there's a level of rebellion and change in the Democratic Party, that's one of the last things that, at least in my opinion, would probably change. Like I said, on the other hand, though, I think one of the things that we really do need, we do need to re-invoke a peace movement and a solidarity movement. And if we can't do that, it's really hard to expect the Democratic Party to do it. But I think it's going to bite us bad. You know, there's going to be, does anybody think there won't be terrorist attacks between now and the election? And what do we have to say about that? Or a coup? What happens if there's a military adventure in Venezuela? You know, or what if Trump stops his love letters to Kim Jong-un? I mean, there's so many explosive points in the world. I mean, look what Trump just said. Okay, Israel should take over the Golan Heights. The Israeli Netanyahu just took on straight-up fascist parties as part of his coalition in Israel. And, I mean, we have to have a democratic point of view on the world, including the socialist countries, can we just say. Or else we just don't have, I mean, we cede a huge part of the moral and political ground. And until we do that, I think the Democratic Party isn't going to do it. I'm sorry, did I? Yeah, you asked your question. Yeah.
And get a feeling that you know, the Democratic Party and the people trying, I mean, progressive, they have like different agendas. The Democratic Party wants to run, perhaps some progressives to lure the progressive energy, to support essentially, eventually the establishment person. Hopefully, in their perspective, establishment person would win. Like, let's say Bernie runs and energizes the boost, but they get somebody else to be the nominee, but then, they get the energy of the progressives. On the, progressive people's side, we want to influence the Democrats to become more progressive and more left, So, obviously, we have different intentions, even though it seems like, we're kind of working together at some point. So my feeling is also like, kind of going back to the Bernie, which is the most known, on the progressive side person. He's seems like a little bit better, but militarism, expenditures, wars, and stuff never seem to be, around the top agendas for him. So to me, that's, like you say, this perspective is to kind of like push that agenda on the left, not just let the electors do that. How do we, participate in that? Or what do you think, of the chances are Bernie becoming a little bit more involved with those type of issues? Or people on the left generally?
Bernie might become more involved. It depends on what happens in the world. But the problem that Bernie has is he's trying to win. And unless we can move and create political space where him taking a controversial position won't hurt him that bad, he is less likely to do it. So in my opinion, it comes back to us. It comes back around on us to create a peace movement and a democratic outlook on the world that can then give space to others. I mean, we have simultaneously a intense fight with the Democratic right wing, and at the same time, an intense need for unity with them to beat the far right. I mean, just think of it. Honestly, most of the media is basically the Democratic right. I'm talking about the mainstream media. That's who they are, okay? Where would we be without them? What media have we got? Most of the funders of our movement are from the Democratic right. Where would we be without them? And not to speak of all the electeds, where there's a huge percentage are on the Democratic right who have power and prestige and resources and whatnot. We can't defeat the far right without them. On the other hand, they also can't defeat them, and I think they know. In fact, that's one of the great things about what's happened in the last few years. That's now clear to everybody. I mean, even centrist candidates running for president are embracing Medicare for all. What does that mean? So we have to open this space up for people to occupy. Nobody who actually is trying to win is going to do that. And if even what Bernie's done has been okay with me, because I just feel like he's constrained. He is a politician, and we want him to win. So we don't want him to say things that are going to make it impossible to win, especially when he can't affect any actual change on that situation. When there's a situation where there is a possibility of affecting some real change, then he better step up. Oh, let me say one thing. I said the challenges for a right-wing candidate. The challenge for a left-wing candidate are the opposite, to win. Any left-wing candidate who's actually a left-wing candidate or who is perceived as one, which is just as important. Kamala Harris is perceived as a left-wing candidate. She is not a left-wing candidate, but she is perceived as one, and so she has the same problem as the actual left-wing candidates, which is this. Anybody who is perceived as a left-wing candidate is going to lose 5% or more of the center, okay? They're going to lose 5% or more of the center. Now, it's very consequential where that 5% is or isn't, but they're going to lose a critical... If the election is held today, it is a freaking close election, okay? We're 2 years away. If you're going to lose 5% of the vote, you damn well better mobilize 6% more. And so any left-wing candidate or perceived left-wing candidate has to have that ability. They have to have that potential to increase the vote on the left. Because, and by the way, it's not just the centrists in the Democratic Party. There are two other parts. It's the centrists in the Republican Party who are basically voting Democratic these days. The actual old centrists, the Bushies are voting Democratic. Okay, even Romney's voting Democratic, except for himself. No, really, Utah is likely to, you saw the Utah vote last time. They were not voting for Trump. That's a second section of the centrists, and a third section of the centrists, though they're not really centrists. They're a disputed vote, though, are the libertarians. The libertarians are damn important. The libertarians won way more votes than the difference between Clinton and Trump in 11 states last time. 11 states. Even the Green Party won more than the difference between Clinton and Trump by itself in like 3. And when it comes to the Electoral College, man, this is important stuff. And here's the thing about the libertarians. They hate Trump. They're right-wingers, but they're a completely different breed. They're intellectuals for the most part, or at least they think they are. They actually think. They don't just react. They cannot stand the actual far right wing, let alone Trump. They do not want to vote for Trump. They do not want Trump to be the president. However, if we nominate Bernie Sanders, they could win as much as 10% of the vote in some states, which could kill us unless we can make up that vote. If they, I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm just trying to say they are a consequential vote, and who the Democrats nominate is going to affect them. And they have, like I said, by themselves, 11 states last time. 11 states, 2 or 3 of which Clinton won, most of them Trump won. And we should, they're a factor. I'm sorry, yeah.
What role do you see labor and organized labor having in the strategy that you're talking about, this outside strategy, and what do you see the relationship between racial politics and labor politics being in the future?
Well, it doesn't really matter what I think, because it matters what they think. I still think labor is an absolutely crucial part of any progressive movement. The problem is not all of them think that. And the problem is, by the way, that not a lot of other progressives, a lot of progressives who are not connected to labor are anti-labor. Let's just be straight up about it, okay? The teachers' strike in LA. We just had a teacher. It was a magnificent strike. One of the best strikes I have ever seen in my life. And several of the most prominent racial justice organizations in town did not support the strike. Freaking amazing, but true. So we have a problem on both ends of this issue. But, and then I don't know if you followed some very interesting struggles that have happened in New York in the Working Families Party with labor, where Cuomo jerked the labor section of the Working Families Party out of the Working Families. Anyway, it's a complicated situation, and I think one of the difficulties labor has is that, of course, it's shrinking. It's shrinking, and it's been shrinking for decades. It has no answer. It has had no answer. There may not be an answer in the short run about that. But as they shrink, they basically have decisions to make about, do we roll the dice, or do we just try to survive smaller? If you just try to survive smaller, you're not going out on a limb, politically. So they have these dual, every institution in America of any size is partly a business. You can't not be. We live in a capitalist society. You have to run your finances. Every nonprofit is a business. You got to pay your payroll, okay? Every union is a business, okay? And so you have your business interests and you have your political interests, okay? And you have to figure out, and often people are very divided over the political interests. And so they're in a terrible situation. Let's just face it. They're in an awful, what's the name of the stupid Supreme Court decision recently? Yeah, it's a killer for a large section of public unions, which are the strongest unions. So I'm hopeful, but not very hopeful. I'm hopeful that they will throw down. I'm hopeful they will not get in behind Joe Biden early, which is possible. I mean, the progressives in labor, the ones who were who backed Bernie last time, the nurses, CWA, et cetera. I think 6 national unions backed Bernie last time, and a lot of locals. The best they're hoping for right now is that they can help make it more difficult for the unions, especially SEIU and AFSCME, to jump out and do an early endorsement of Joe Biden. And part of that is that they're not doing an early endorsement of Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie's in a completely different situation this year, going back to the Bernie issue. It's not just Bernie and Hillary. There's all sorts of candidates who represent some of the interests that only Bernie represented last time. So there's lots of interest in the unions, in a Joe Biden, in a whoever, in a whatever. And what, 6 of them have said they support Medicare for all. So, you know, Bernie's in a more complicated situation. It's a highly complicated field. And the unions, I don't know. It's just, it's hard. The thing I'm involved in is called, I think, Melody. I may as well say what it is. And I'm going to say what it is. It's going to kind of sound a little bit impressive, but hold your enthusiasm. I'm hopeful. It's called the State Power Caucus. It is something like 26 statewide organizations, racial justice, community organizing, electoral groups from 17 states. The weakest of them touch 200,000 to 300,000 voters a cycle. The strongest reach 1.5 million to 2 million voters a cycle. They all started out as community organizing groups, and they're still community organizing groups, but they all were part of that finally going into elections thing in this last 10 years. So we are trying to do 2 things. We're trying to seriously build the power of our groups in the state, not just of our groups. We're trying to create united fronts in the states, okay? Now, the language these days that a lot of people are using is alignment tables, usually with labor and other progressive groups, Planned Parenthood, et cetera, in the states. There's a number of states that have those, Florida, Ohio, Missouri. There's at least 7 or 8 states. Some of them are stronger or weaker. So we're trying to build those up in the states, and we're trying to build the similar thing at the national level. And so we started with, you know, I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with the community organizing world, there are 4 national community organizing networks in the country. There is the first one was the Center for Community Change, which started out as technical assistance, morphed into a national network of community organizing groups. They organize by campaign issue. Their biggest issue, their biggest coalition is around immigration. Most of what's happened in the country up until the last 2 years, oddly, they were behind as regards immigration, for good or for bad. They have like 120 staffers, just in their national staff, and dozens of member groups. The second one is the Faith in Action, which used to be called PICO. Okay, I think it's still called PICO in California. They are also large. Until the Center for Community Change came up, it was by far the biggest funded community organizing network in the country. The third one is the Center for Popular Democracy. The Center for Popular Democracy, the leadership came out of the people who formed Make the Road by Walking in New York City, probably the largest local community organizing group in the country. Like, they have like 60 or 70 staff. And they built, and then the Acorn, the former Acorn groups all joined it, okay? They're kind of the flavor of the month when it comes to the funders. In the last 2 or 3 years, they've grown also to about 100 staffers. And the fourth one, was that People's Action. People's Action formed as a merger of several networks. And and then there's a fifth one that's not really quite the same, but it's kind of, it's different but connected. It's the Working Families Party. Working Families Party. People familiar with the Working Families Party? New York, basically anybody remember the New Party? Okay, the New Party was the most sophisticated attempt to form a third party in the United States. What made it sophisticated is it adopted what's called the fusion strategy. The fusion strategy, fusion has to be legal for it to work. It's legal in New York. What it is that a party, one party can cross-endorse with another party. That's fusion, okay? So New York has always had three parties. Long before there was a Working Families Party, there was the Liberal Party. And what basically happens is if you gain enough strength, you can bargain with the Democratic Party and say, okay, we're supporting these Democrats in these districts, the Democrats are supporting these Working Families Party candidates in these districts, and we're all supporting the statewide candidate. So you don't take votes from each other the way it works in the rest of the country, okay? The trouble is, fusion was, they tried to get fusion declared legal everywhere, and it failed. So the only place it could work was in the 4 or 5 states that have fusion, and it's really New York where it's worked. Anyway, the Working Families Party has long had largely a labor-based strategy. They've done well. They're a force in New York. But they had rumbles, they had disagreements, then they knew they had to face this threat from Cuomo, to the labor section. So they had an internal change, and they just chose a new executive director, who's a racial justice guy, comes out of Black Lives Matter, but he's also a sophisticated electoral operative. So it's giving the possibility of the Working Families Party, it's giving, there's a whole new possibility there. I don't know what's going to happen with it. Anyway, all of those sets with our little group, the State Power Caucus, are trying to start as the core of a united front. We spent months trying to get strategic unity. We more or less got that. Now we're trying to unite on a common plan. If we unite on a common plan, maybe we'll be something. If we don't, maybe we won't. But that's what the thing I'm working on is, and we're hoping to bring labor and many others in.
I just want to jump in as a timekeeper here. We're only probably have time for probably one more question. I think that
Well, there's 3 of them that had their hands up a long time.
We probably should go to like a quarter 2, and then Bob's gonna sit back there and he's gonna sign some books. Be a special deal, $10, right, for your book, and then I have to rush Bob to the Greyhound station, so that's why I'm jumping in there. So
Okay, here's the way I'm going to do it. All 3 of you ask your question, and I'll respond to whoever I want to. But be quick. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi.
Especially the take back the land and
Yeah.
all that.
I was going to talk about what an inside-outside strategy would look like, given that, you know, I'm in a public sector union, and I'm curious about, like, if we needed an outside to develop well, what would that look like for different institutions, like focus groups?
If Bernie Sanders is the candidate, will he choose a woman for vice president?
He's an idiot if he doesn't. Okay? So that's the answer to that. And the answer to yours is, don't get too bogged down in this word outside. All it means is organizing outside of elections. So when you organize your members, when you go on strike, when you fight for this, that, the other, when you whatever, that's outside. That's all it means. So every institution has, you know, most every institution that's not strictly a political, even a lot of political parties have work they do that are not related to elections, okay? Issue work, whatever, okay? The South, I'm going to broaden it, not to Jackson. So here's a few things I want to make sure everybody knows about the South. The South, well, first of all, a lot of people may not know this, but you know, Texas and Florida were part of the Confederacy. When you talk about the South, you are including Texas and Florida. You are actually excluding a few states that were slave states. Did you know Delaware was a slave state? It was. But it's not considered part of the South. West Virginia didn't even exist during slavery. It was Lincoln split it off from Virginia during the Civil War to have a base. So there's some, you know, West Virginia I would include because it's very southern in its own way. Anyway, the point being, okay, the first thing is this. The South has more population, is growing faster in population, as a result of having the most population, has the most congressional representatives and the most electoral votes of any region of the country. Now, really, can we win this country without winning a significant part of the biggest, fastest growing section of the country? The answer is obviously no. The second part of it is this. The South is obviously the historic heart, though I guess that heart is spread, of racism in the country. It's also the poorest part of the country. It is also highly disproportionate section of the military-industrial complex. Now, really, are we not going to fight on those issues? I mean, what does it mean to fight racism and not deal with the South? What does it mean to fight militarism or poverty and not deal with the South, the poorest part of the region in the country? Okay, there's no way we can ignore the South, not to speak of the fact that it has a major, if not the major section of progressive voters and progressive people in the country, especially black people, but Latinos in Texas, and also an increasing number of white people. Durham, North Carolina may be the most progressive city in the United States of America, believe it or not. So here's the thing. The South has changed radically. Whatever your old ideas, if you have old ideas about the South, the only one of them that is still true is that racism is stronger in the South than anywhere else. So basically, though, I would say that it's useful to kind of think of the South as in three or four parts, not one. You have the states like Maryland, North Carolina, to some degree Georgia, the states that are economically, Florida, Texas, that are growing rapidly, okay? And those are the states that tend to be, I mean, basically, in addition to black people, what's happening is every city in the South of any size votes Democratic. Okay, that's been true. In 2000, there was only one metro area in the whole country that voted for Bush. That was Dallas. Dallas now votes blue, okay? So throughout the country, including the South, the cities vote Democratic. And the cities are growing rapidly in the South, okay? Because the economy is growing. That's why the population is growing, okay? So the South is undergoing transformation, but at different paces in different places. The South also has some states like Kentucky and West Virginia that basically don't have any black people. And it's got Mississippi with 38%. There's a huge differential there. Voting-wise, you've got the Deep South, the four Deep South states of South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. The white people vote about 90% Republican and are 25 to 35% black. You have another rung of North Carolina, Georgia, a few others, so my brain is not so rapid, where the population is about 20% black, and the white people vote closer to 75 instead of 90% Republican. Basically, you've got very different scenarios in different states. And so the way the South is going to be won is by taking it state by state. And you can already see it happening. You know, several states have already gone blue. Georgia, I mean, Stacey Abrams, boom. Andrew Gillum, boom. Now, they didn't win, but who thought that a person coming out of Bernie's camp would almost be the governor of Florida, or Stacey Abrams in Georgia? So I'm just trying to say there's a lot of potential. Now, Jackson, Mississippi, who's heard of Chokwe Lumumba? Okay. Chokwe Lumumba is older than me, was older than me. He was the second top leader in a black nationalist organization, a black nationalist socialist organization in the 1960s called the Republic of New Africa. He won the mayorship of Jackson, Mississippi in 2012, 13, somewhere in there. Jackson, Mississippi is the capital of Mississippi, the largest city, and the city with the second highest proportion of black people in the country. I wrote an article about it which tells you what I thought. I went there, and it was a lot of fun. I don't have time to go through all that. But my point is that, in general, there are, I can't remember the number, there are a large number of towns and counties with black majorities in the South. There are really no places outside the South with a black majority. There are a ton of Latino majority towns in Texas, okay? Phoenix, which is outside when we're moving to the south, I mean, basically people of color are strongest in the urban areas, the south and the southwest, okay? So that has to come strong into consideration when we think about a national strategy for progressives. And places like Durham or Jackson, honestly, there's some really interesting things going on here that aren't particularly going on elsewhere. So I don't know if it's worth going into detail, but at least I want to call your attention. And you know, the Democrats have a long history of basically taking the black vote for granted, writing off the South, and if the mainstream of the Democratic Party has their way, they'll focus on 4 Midwestern states in this next election. And you know, honestly, let's even say they won. What will they end up winning? You know, how will it move the needle when you think of this fight we're in as a long-term? It's really at a level, I mean, it's just a huge fight. The country is going one way or the other in a big way in the next 20, 30 years. And I really think that's the perspective that we have to fight from. Anyway, thank you.